What's up, everybody? Welcome into a new edition of the By the Horns podcast. Cam Smith riding with my guy, KC Johnson, CHSN Bulls Insider. And know that By the Horns is presented by Toyota. Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. So make sure you find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. KC, the last time I saw you was post-game after that tough Cavs loss for this Bulls team in Chicago. So we're spinning it forward because you switched cities. You're in New York City right now as we record this pod because the Bulls are setting up for a matchup against the New York Knicks at the world's most famous arena, Madison Square Garden. So this is an interesting matchup with this Bulls team as you look at what their road record is, which sits at 500 at 3-3. And Bulls coming into this situation with a little bit of an advantage, if you can see it that way, with the New York Knicks playing the previous night against the Philadelphia 76ers. They kicked off their NBA Cup group play with the win over the Sixers, and actually Philly, with the return of Joel Embiid, kept it tighter than most expected. So what are you thinking for this Bulls team coming into this ball game and how they match up with the Knicks?
Well, I think if you carry over a lot of what you saw in the Cleveland game, you give yourself a chance. I thought there was way more positive than negative in that game. Obviously, the turnovers were the issue and the points off turnovers. But in terms of competitiveness and offensive style, and for a large portion of that game, defense, I thought you saw a lot of positives in that Cleveland game. And if you bring that kind of style and mindset and approach to every game, you're going to give yourself a chance. That's all this league's about, Cam. You know that is giving yourselves a chance to win on the road. Jalen Brunson, a player we both know very well, is actually listed as questionable. By the time some people might be listening to this, we'll know his status. But he rolled that ankle last night in Philly, returned to play on it. But those things can swell up overnight. My guess, and you probably know this since you know him like I do, my guess is he'll play. But that would certainly improve the Bulls' chances if he's out. But, yeah, I mean, they just got to take better care of the basketball, especially against a Knicks team that really likes to slow it down and play in the half court. This is a matchup against the number 1 and the number 30th ranked teams in terms of pace. So you got a kind of a contrast in styles where Tom Thibodeau likes to grind it out in the half court. And if the Bulls can speed it up, maybe that gives them a better chance.
Yeah, we saw those 21 turnovers by the Bulls against the Cleveland Cavaliers the other night, and 35 points off of those turnovers for Cleveland. So it makes an interesting kind of contrast. And we know when it comes to, I'm going to use a boxing analogy to this, styles make fights. And so to your point of the New York Knicks wanting that slower pace as opposed to the Bulls that really want to go up and down, it could be a dangerous situation with this team just in terms of how they're turning the basketball over, because we saw it against Cleveland, KC, with the bigger defenders, especially that the Cavaliers have. And we know the Knicks have that with guys like Josh Hart and OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges. They have guys that can really make it physically tough for you on drives. So when you're in that half-court setting, everybody has to be on one accord to make sure, one, that you can execute, but also keep pace on the scoreboard with the Knicks team. So for me, looking at this matchup, that's the concern that I have is if the Bulls get down early because they're turning the basketball over and allowing the Knicks to get out and run, and any easy way for a team to coming off or playing on the tail end of a back-to-back to get themselves going is to create those live ball turnovers and get out and score. So that's one of the major concerns that I have with this team, is we'll have that concern in every single ball game with this Bulls club because they have those issues of turnovers.
Yeah, I mean, they're obviously trying to play a different style where they're playing faster, and that's going to lead to quicker decision-making. And, even whether you're in transition or in the half court, I mean, you're seeing so much drive and react, drive and kick. Yeah. So that involves two guys reading each other properly, and sometimes there's going to be mistakes. What I need to see less of, and I'm sure Billy Donovan would agree with me, is the jumping in the air without really knowing where you're going to go with it. And that's going to lead to turnovers that can be avoided. So, look, turnovers are going to happen, but the numbers which are coming, the Bulls have such a small margin of error for victory. And when you commit the numbers that they have and it leads to the opponent's points that they have, that's been the troubling stat. It's 4 games over 28 or more points off turnovers. That's just insane. So, if you do that, you're not going to win many games in the NBA.
Yeah, you're right about that, Casey. And that's one of the recurring themes of this Bulls team going into each game is the turnovers, but then also them not having more shot attempts than their opponent. And part of that is because of those turnovers. So, again, with this matchup against the Knicks and a guy like Tom Thibodeau who wants to make sure that this is a grinded out physical game, especially knowing his history against the Bulls, it'll be a situation for this Knicks team where they want to start to try to string together more wins and make it a couple of wins for themselves in a row. So when you have the good things that you touched on off of that Cleveland game, you saw some great stuff from this Bulls team offensively, especially in that first half where all five starters, scored in double figures. It's the first time that they did that since the 97-98 season. That's a positive that you can take into this ball game. But also, more specifically, Zach LaVine looked phenomenal against the Cleveland Cavaliers, even when they tried to throw multiple defenders at him. And one guy that got the brunt of that work was Ty Jerome, who eventually in that fourth quarter had to be switched off of Zach LaVine. And we saw Donovan Mitchell spend the majority of the game of final crucial moments against Zach LaVine. 26 points for Zach, and that also comes into this ball game, KC, scoring 20-plus points against the New York Knicks in his last 10.
Yeah, and I actually think he's played well in both games since his return. We're taping this right before the Knicks game. He didn't score as much in Atlanta, but what I loved about that was he read the game. I mean, he came out aggressively and scored initially, but then when he started attracting more attention and some traps started coming his way, he got off the ball. And I thought he really turned into a smart decision maker and facilitator down the stretch of that game. So, look, I mean, we've talked about it before, Cam. I mean, you're around him. I'm around him. I've covered his entire Bulls tenure. He's just in a really good place mentally and physically. And I know I keep saying that, but the reason I keep saying that is because it's true. And it can't be overstated for where this relationship stood last season. And that's not to say everything's kumbaya. I mean, if the Bulls find the right trade opportunity, they're going to trade him. That's a reality that both he and the organization knows. But it's just the kind of bitterness is too strong a word, but kind of the unsettledness that permeated last season is gone. And we heard it from the jump when Zach came in on media day and announced it. And I've checked in with him privately, publicly since then, and he's still there. And so that's off the court. And I think you're seeing that translate to some on the court, along with the fact that, quite frankly, he's healthy, right? I mean, he wasn't healthy last season. So I couldn't agree with you more. I thought he was really good in the Cleveland game, and I also think he was good in the Atlanta game.
Yeah, and you speak to just, where he is mentally off the court, and it's a direct reflection of how he's playing on the court as well. But you bring up the Atlanta game and just how he was able to more so defer to other guys because he understood that they had that going. And that's, to me, watching that from Zach, and he's been in the league. We know this for a number of years, but that's just another sign of growth with his game that he can understand that, hey, Ayo, who was a guy off the bench that was so impactful for that Bulls team in Atlanta, that he was a guy that was getting it going really. And then you also have those other options. So I think for Zach, you're seeing another level to him this season, which is great for him as well.
Yeah, and I mean, he's had like other players, he's been guilty of some high turnover games. I mean, he's had two games with 7 turnovers, and he knows he's got to cut those down. But overall, I think his decision making has been more positive than negative. And I've always maintained I think he's most lethal in catch and shoot situations and away from decision making situations. But I think the last 2 games, his decision making, the ball's been in his hands a lot, and his decision making has been on point. So I think he's been one of the main positives to this early Bulls season, both again on the court and certainly off the court as well.
Yeah, another one of those positives for this Bulls team on and off the court, especially on the court, has been Nikola Vucevic. I mean, this dude continues to just be Vooch, right? I mean, at times a walking double-double. He has 6 in the first 10 games for this Bulls team. He had 20 and 8 against the Cleveland Cavaliers. And you're starting to see him have those opportunities, as Billy Donovan has talked to the media members, yourself and also myself, in terms of playing through Vooch at times where he can get that mismatch, whether it's in transition, catching at the top of the key, if he's in rhythm. And we've talked to Vooch about last season, the difference between last season and this season is saying that last season he felt like he was forcing shots, but this season it's within the rhythm and flow of what this team is doing, especially with the faster pace. So, I mean, Vooch is Vooch, and is just a guy that you can rely on, especially scoring that basketball.
Yeah, I mean, everything looks better as you know, Cam. Like everything looks better when shots are going in, right? He's not going to shoot 46.8% from 3-point range.
Yeah, right. I was wondering, Casey, like how long can Vooch keep this up? Not trying to like prey on his downfall, but also like that's a very high percentage at 46.
Right. And he's at 58.5 overall. So look, those are going to come down. That's just the reality of the situation. The point is though, regardless of when that reverts to the mean, and you know, obviously last season was hopefully an outlier in terms of how poor his 3-point percentage was that. But regardless of all that stuff, to me, it's how Vooch is fitting in with the style of play. Because everyone said, oh, they're trying to play faster. Where's that going to leave a slow-footed 34-year-old center? No, man. He's a very good decision maker. He's a willing passer. You can run offense through him. There's secondary transition where he's trailing the play and he's open up the top, and that puts pressure on defenses. He can post up and pass out of double teams. So, yeah, I mean, look, his stats tell the whole story. And, you know, I quite frankly think, you know, people have speculated about changes coming to this roster. If he keeps playing at this level, I mean, all it takes is an injury. And I'm looking at the Lakers right now with, you know, their centers going down one after the other. I'm just saying, like, maybe Vooch is moved before LaVine because, again, I do think while the Bulls value him greatly, I mean, that's just the nature of the business where they're at in their rebuild, is that if the right opportunity presents itself, they would probably pull a trigger on that deal. So, look, Vooch is a total professional. You know what you're going to get from him in terms of his durability, his consistency on the court, and just his professionalism off of it. So he's like Zach, to me, he's been a huge bright spot early in the season.
Yeah, one of those names that will be a hot name for sure in that trade market for a lot of teams, as you mentioned, with possibly the Lakers with their injury issues, and you know, with a guy that can stretch the floor with a shot and also can get down on the block and get you baskets with his back to the basket. It's a luxury in the NBA to have guys that, along with being a veteran, a guy that can pass the basketball. And I think that's one of the underrated parts of Vooch's game that we've seen really throughout his career, but also this season as well with this more up-tempo offense. And I think other teams are taking notice of how Vooch is able to fit in passing the basketball in transition or when he gets double to find guys. So I think for him, and being in this spot, especially tonight, we'll see even more of that in this matchup against the Knicks, because it's going to be a hell of a matchup with Karl-Anthony Towns, who feels like he's had a resurgence just with his career. I get it, you know, new team, new city, but also back around his roots where he's a Jersey kid. So it'll be one of Vooch's more interesting matchups that we're going to see for him this season. What do you think, and how do you think he tries to attack that with Karl-Anthony Towns, and what Tom Thibodeau will try to do to lessen Vooch's impact on the game?
Yeah, and then it just keeps coming again with Friday, a rematch of the Cavs and their big front line. So, I mean, that's just how the league works. Yeah, I mean, you know, both Towns and Vooch try to sometimes draw guys away from the basket with their shooting ability. So, in that sense, it's probably a pretty favorable matchup for Vooch. You know, but look, Tibbs is pretty good at trying to get the ball out of hands of primary scorers. That's kind of the staple of his defense. So there's going to be a lot of defensive attention focused on Zach and Vooch, no doubt.
All right. So when you have positive, Casey, you know that you got to have some negatives as well. And we're going to focus in on Josh Giddey, who has had some bright moments at times with his Bulls team, but going back to what this team continues to deal with every night, and it's the turnover issue, even going back to the game against the Cleveland Cavaliers. He had 4 turnovers, and just, again, with the jump passing with Giddey at his size, it makes it interesting of why he elects to do that. And even speaking to him post-game, he says that he has to be better, and we understand that, but it's one thing to say it, but you actually have to put in the effort to stay away from those turnovers. So what are you seeing from Giddey that, one, he's having issues with, but then also, two, how he can improve those issues to help his team?
Yeah, I mean, he's at 2.7 turnovers, which is just a hair over his career average of 2.6 per game, down from his career worst his rookie season in OKC with 3.2. So it's, to me, less the turnovers, because turnovers are really kind of a byproduct of the way he plays. I mean, he tries some passes that a lot of players just do not try. They're mostly rooted from good intentions. Yes, he's been guilty of some jump passes like Zach has been. Those you got to get rid of. Look, statistically, there is absolutely nothing wrong with the way Josh Giddey has played to this point. He's even shooting 43.2% from three-point range on 3.4 attempts. So forget the percentage, which will probably come down to his career or closer to his career average of 31.6 at some point. What I like is that he has been not hesitating on open shots because he's going to get a lot of them because defenses know that's like the game plan is to leave him open. And so in this offense, the way they're trying to play, if you pass up an open shot, that's going to gum things up. So I give him credit for that, and he's making them right now. So look, statistically, there's nothing wrong with the way Giddey played. What I've been troubled by, and it's only 2 games, so as a writer, you're always trying to focus on trends and be cognizant of those. Like he hasn't been in the closing lineup 2 straight games. Now, Billy hasn't been asked about it. Josh hasn't been asked about it. And that's because it's only been 2 games. If it happens, we're taping this again the night of the Knicks game. If it happens again tonight, I'm going to be asking about it because if you trade your second, third, whatever you want to term Caruso in terms of where he falls in the pecking order behind DeRozan, LaVine, maybe Caruso second, maybe second or third best player for a guy who can't close games, then you've got a problem, especially a guy who's going to need a contract in the offseason. So, and the problem with this lineup as constructed is if he's closing, who's not? Patrick Williams, your newly minted $90 million man. Ayo Dosunmu, who to me is arguably the best 2-way player on the team. So these are the decisions facing Billy Donovan as a coaching staff. And again, that's where I've been focused on to see if this turns into a long-term trend.
And if people are watching and listening to wherever they get their pods, you understand that Casey did not mention the names of Zach LaVine and Kobe White. Like, you're not putting them on the bench in those closing minutes and clutch moments for Josh Giddey. Like, we get that. But also it begs the question of how does he fit within those crunch time minutes? And I think a great example would be the situation in Atlanta, right, with his Bulls team, another double-digit deficit that they had to climb out of the grave from. But it was Ayo Dosunmu, especially in those clutch moments defensively, that stepped up for this team. And I just think how he fits with this group, especially since we're talking clutch moments and clutch minutes, that basketball will be in the hands of a Zach LaVine or Kobe White to create, maybe involving Vooch in some high ball screen situations. But it feels like Ayo, how he plays and how he attacks, whether it's off the wing to the middle or on the baseline, it just feels like he's a better fit for this Bulls team. Now, his jumper is improving. Now, his percentages from 3 going into that Atlanta game were rough, but he has improved the past couple of games from knocking down a shot. But it feels like from that angle, offensively, he fits better. And then I think defensively, what's known doesn't have to be said. Like, it doesn't have to be explaining what Ayo is to this team.
Yeah, I mean, let's cut to the chase. I mean, like, teams target Giddey when he's in there, and they don't target Ayo. And look, I give Josh a lot of credit. I don't know him very well yet, but like from the time of the trade, like the first Zoom we had with him in the offseason throughout training camp, he is definitely a guy who looks inward and takes responsibility. Him falling out of the playoff rotation in OKC humbled him, and he didn't get bitter about it. He's like, what do I need to do to improve? So the recognition is there. Like, I need to become a better 2-way player so teams don't target me. Forget the fact that Dallas was leaving him wide open as a shooter and he wasn't able to hit because, again, I think that's been offset by the way he shot the ball without hesitation and obviously to a high percentage with the Bulls early on. But the defense, that's still happening. He's getting targeted. And until he improves that end of the bargain, you can't fault Billy Donovan for going with a guy he trusts in Ayo or Patrick Williams or somebody defensively. Look, it's early. We got to preface everything with that. He's undeniably an incredibly talented player. And again, statistically, I've had no issue with the way he started the season. I think he's actually been good statistically, but the on-off stats are not incredibly favorable, and the fact that he hasn't closed 2 straight games aren't incredibly favorable. So we'll see where it goes. It's something to talk about on November 13th, and maybe it becomes a moot point at some point, right?
Yeah, we're hoping that for Josh Giddey and that we can move forward with this Bulls team and just them turning things around, especially when it comes to just developing consistency and not getting down double-digit points and having to be the zombie Bulls where they have to crawl back and get back into a ball game. But sometimes it happens like that because it is the NBA. So, and speaking just of the challenges that this team has faced so far in the early part of the season, KC, they have a rough stretch that starts tonight as we record this pod, as we mentioned, against the New York Knicks on the road. 6 of their next 10 will be road games. And for a team that's 500 on the road right now at 3-3, what do you foresee big picture with how they possibly survive, and what we'll learn about this team when we get to that 10th game, which will be a home game against the Boston Celtics, the reigning NBA champs.
Yeah, I think the as tough as the schedule has been in terms of now the road tests come and the quality of opponent. To me, the other big thing that has played out earlier in the season is they've only had one stretch where they've had 2 days between games. It's been every other, and so you're either you're either playing a back-to-back or you're having a rest day at home and then getting ready for the next, or you're jumping on an airplane. It's like when teams value those 2-day stretches because they can get one off day and one practice day. Yeah. Coaches especially value that. They haven't been able to do that. They've been barely practicing this season because of the amount of time they have coming up. So, we're taping this on Wednesday, November 13th. Then they play Friday, Sunday, back-to-back Monday, Wednesday, Friday, back-to-back Saturday. Then you finally get that 2-day stretch, Sunday, Monday, before you go on that 2-game trip, which is a back-to-back at Washington, at Orlando, followed by a day off on Thanksgiving and that game you alluded to, Friday game against Boston at home. So that's rough, man. That's tough. And look, everyone's got stretch. Every team. I'm not saying woe the Bulls, because every team's got tough schedule stretches. But I will say I've been doing this a long time. This starts of this schedule in terms of quality opponent, lack of 2-day breaks between games has really stood out to me. I don't quite recall one this challenging. And we're going to learn a lot about this team over the next 10 games for sure.
Is there a direct correlation with that though, KC, when it comes to just lack of practice time and court time on the court together with the lack of breaks in between games? Because you're talking about the travel schedule and you really have a day with just how it's set up with this Bulls team of rest, and that rest is not really rest because you're at shoot around and prepping for that next opponent. Is there a direct correlation from that along with the turnovers that we're seeing with this team playing this new style of up and down basketball?
Great question, Cam. I mean, you obviously hear the cliche from coaches, which is somewhat true to extent, like you try to maximize like walk-through time and film work. But when you have a schedule this challenging, coaches tend to let players get off their feet. So again, they played Cleveland at home on Monday, just to kind of take listeners behind the curtain. They had an off day Tuesday where they just flew to New York. They didn't even have shoot around this morning because where they stay in lower Manhattan, it's such a slog to get up to Madison Square Garden. So they just had a walkthrough and film session at the team hotel. They aren't practicing tomorrow in Cleveland. They will have shoot around in Cleveland. So your question's a very good one, Cam, because in order to develop those reps and that chemistry and that instinctual reads of cuts and non-cuts in this fast-paced offense, you need time on the court. You know that. Yeah. So that's a great question. I hadn't thought of it in those terms. I just thought about it more in terms of just, demands, physical and mental demands. But no, it's and especially with a young team, they need practice time. So I know Billy Donovan has bemoaning the lack of practice time.
All right, well, that practice time has to come against real competition, and that is not themselves. It is against other teams, and it starts tonight against the New York Knicks in Madison Square Garden. As we talked about, 6 of the next 10 for the Chicago Bulls will be on the road. This team sitting at 4-7, still 10 in the East right now, but trying to improve on that 3-3 record on the road. So when we tap back in with listeners, KC, we'll have a better idea of what this team is and who this team is, and see if things have changed for the better with them. But for my man KC Johnson, CHSN Bulls Insider, I'm your host Cam Smith. This is a wrap for the By the Horns podcast, which is presented by Toyota. And know that Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. So find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. We'll see everybody soon. Take care.